8 human species once walked the Earth. Today, only one remains. What happened to everyone else? Humans weren't supposed to be alone, so why are we the last humans left on Earth? Imagine living in a world where other human species still existed. They did, until they vanished. You think you're the only human. Technically, you're the last surviving human species. This isn't the story of how humans evolved. It's the story of how every other human disappeared. 40,000 years ago, Earth wasn't ours alone. Then one by one, every other human species disappeared. Why?
Think about this for a second. If you could hop into a time machine and travel back just 50,000 years, which, honestly, is a total blink of an eye in geological time, you would find a planet where several completely different kinds of humans existed at the exact same time. Some of them looked a lot like us. Others were built totally differently, shaped by harsh climates and brutal landscapes that would absolutely break a modern person.
So, what happened to everyone else? We love to unquestioningly accept human history as this neat, straight line leading inevitably right to us. But the truth is way messier. There's no clean answer here, no single smoking gun in this cold case. The disappearance of our evolutionary cousins wasn't just one dramatic event, but this incredibly complex, slow-motion disappearing act.
It's so natural to assume we survived because we were simply better. Were we the smartest, the absolute strongest, the ones who had been here the longest? We love to cast ourselves as the ultimate, destined victors of evolution. But as we dig into the evidence, we really have to question that assumption. The data tells a very, very different story about why we are the ones sitting here today.
Actually, scratch that whole pinnacle of evolutionary design idea. The humbling reality is this: we are just the ones who are still here. Our survival isn't some straightforward tale of absolute dominance or biological superiority. To understand how this all played out, we have to investigate the other suspects in our evolutionary lineup, starting with the ones who practically defined what it means to be successful.
Section 1. Homo erectus, the marathon runners.
Let's look at our first subject. You can kind of think of Homo erectus as the marathon runners of the human family. Their bodies were the very first to look recognizably human to our modern eyes. They had these long legs, shorter arms, and a physical frame that was just perfectly designed for walking and running over vast stretches of open ground. Homo erectus showed up around 2 million years ago. Take a second to let that massive number sink in. 2 million years. They were almost certainly the first human species to leave Africa and spread into other parts of the world, figuring out how to survive in totally alien environments.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how staggering their run actually was. Think about it. Everything modern humans have ever accomplished, every towering city we've built, every war we've fought, every single language we've ever spoken, all of it fits neatly inside the last few thousand years. Our entire recorded history is just a tiny little footnote compared to the reign of Homo erectus. Which really begs the ultimate question. How does a species last for 2 million years and then just vanish? Well, their final chapter is pretty tragic. Their last known populations ended up trapped on the island of Java in Indonesia. They were totally cut off from the mainland, the forest they hunted in started shrinking, and the animals they relied on disappeared. With no new territory to move into, a species that had survived practically everything the planet could throw at them simply ran out of options about 110,000 years ago.
Section 2. Neanderthals, the misunderstood cousins.
Now, what's really interesting about Neanderthals is how much we get them wrong. They are, without a doubt, the most misunderstood species in all of human history. For decades, pop culture has completely written them off, picturing them as these dim, brutish cavemen just dragging clubs around. But as science advances, the reality contrasts vastly with that myth. Neanderthals were highly complex survivors. Get this, they actually had brains that were, on average, slightly bigger than ours. They controlled fire, made sophisticated stone tools, and even buried their dead with care. Their bodies were compact and incredibly powerful, featuring large noses to warm up freezing air. They hunted massive, dangerous animals at such close range that their skeletons actually show injury patterns remarkably similar to modern-day rodeo riders.
So around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, that's our direct ancestors, started moving right into Neanderthal territory in Europe and Western Asia. For a few thousand years, we literally lived side by side, and DNA proves we even had children together. But look at the societal difference here. Sapiens lived in larger groups with vast social networks, allowing for the sharing of resources and knowledge. Neanderthals, on the other hand, lived in much smaller, highly isolated groups.
So the big question is, did we violently wipe them out? Well, the evidence makes that classic theory highly questionable. It wasn't some single dramatic ancient war, it was a slow fade. Living in those isolated groups made it incredibly hard for Neanderthals to bounce back from difficult times.
Throw in fierce competition for the exact same animals and a wildly fluctuating climate of hot and cold periods, and their populations simply shrank. By 40,000 years ago, lacking genetic diversity, they quietly disappeared from the fossil record.
Section 3. Denisovans, the genetic ghosts.
That brings us to our most mysterious suspects yet. This group is completely different from every other species we're looking at today because, well, we can barely even see them. They are essentially genetic ghosts, hiding just out of sight in the evolutionary record. And their discovery is wild. It all started with a single, tiny finger bone pulled from a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. Literally a fragment small enough to sit on a coin. But when scientists extracted the DNA, it didn't match Neanderthals. It didn't match sapiens. It was a completely unknown branch of the human family that had been hiding right under our noses all along.
Since that first bone, we've basically just found a few teeth and a piece of jawbone. That's the whole shebang. Yet, their genetic shadow is absolutely massive. Today, Denisovan ancestry shows up in modern populations across parts of Asia and Oceania. In fact, some modern Melanesian groups carry as much as 6% Denisovan DNA. They faded out as a distinct species around 30,000 years ago, likely due to thin population numbers when the climate shifted, but their legacy absolutely survived.
So, the crucial point is that this DNA isn't just some leftover relic. It is actively helping people today. Modern Tibetans inherited a specific Denisovan gene called EPAAS1. This gene literally allows their bodies to function at extreme, freezing altitudes, where a normal human body would basically begin to shut down. A species we can barely even find in the dirt is still shaping how living humans breathe thin air today. It's just mind-blowing.
Section 4. Homo florenziensis, Island Oddities.
Okay, in 2003, on the remote Indonesian island of Flores, researchers stumbled onto one of the strangest chapters in human history. At first, scientists were highly skeptical, thinking they just found a modern human with a developmental disorder. But they hadn't. They found remains that defied all conventional logic, an entirely new species, Homo floresiensis. This species stood barely 3 feet, or about 1 meter tall, and their brains, roughly the size of a grapefruit. It sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel, but this was a very real, incredibly adapted human species surviving in the deep past.
And you know, their environment was just as bizarre as they were. On this isolated island, they lived alongside giant predatory Komodo dragons, massive storks, and literal dwarf elephants. Extreme isolation on islands often drives evolution in bizarre directions. It shrinks large animals to save resources and grows small animals to fill empty niches. Homo floresiensis is for sure one of the most remarkable examples of this biological weirdness.
So, they hung on in Flores from about 100,000 years ago, right up until roughly 50,000 years ago. Interestingly enough, that is exactly when modern humans started arriving in the region. Now, we don't know for sure if we interacted with them, but sometimes a tiny specialized population on a small island doesn't need a massive meteor strike to disappear, right? Faced with new pressures, they might have simply run out of time.
Section 5. The Sapiens Secret.
Let's move to this next part and see how this all builds together. Because after examining the marathon runners, the cold-adapted cousins, the high-altitude ghosts, and the island oddities, we are right back to our original mystery. Why are we the only ones left? Intelligence alone doesn't explain it. All these species were intelligent and incredibly well adapted. So what was the sapiens' secret? It wasn't just raw brainpower, it was our networking advantage. We built vast connections across distances. Tools, techniques, and knowledge move between our communities at speeds and scales entirely unseen in other human species. If one group faced a devastating crisis, their knowledge didn't just die with them, it had already been shared. When climate shifted, we had the social flexibility to reorganize, because we weren't locked into one place or one rigid strategy.
But honestly, even that amazing networking ability only explains part of the story. The rest, it comes down to something much more humbling. Pure luck. Geography. Being in the right place at the right time with just enough numbers to scrape by. We weren't inherently destined to be the last ones standing. The other species weren't just stepping stones on the way to us. They were totally successful, distinct kinds of humans in their own right. We just happened to catch the right breaks.
For almost all of human history, we were just one branch of a much larger, incredibly diverse family tree. Now, we stand entirely alone. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If survival comes down to a delicate mix of social networking, extreme adaptability, and a massive amount of luck, well, as the climate shifts once again and our modern networks face unprecedented strain, exactly how long will our luck last?